Being a chief of staff is like leading a high-stakes expedition, but you don't have a map and you don't have the right gear. The weather shifts daily, the terrain is really challenging, you're expected to guide others and eventually make it to the summit. You are navigating the chaos of today while also trying to see the vision of what it's going to look like tomorrow. I know what it's like to feel like you're holding everything together for others while quietly drifting away from your own purpose. I know this feeling really well. I've been a chief of staff and I've been in other generalist operator roles. And these were roles that were very exciting and looked great on paper, but were pretty disorienting in practice. I felt like I was holding a lot of things together for others, but I was sort of quietly drifting away from my own purpose. I knew I could be having more impact, but I didn't know how to get there without burning out. And in many ways, I probably already was. I felt a lot of shame about talking about that or asking for help, because in this role, there's often the feeling that you have to have it all together for everyone around you. What shifted things for me wasn't another tool or more advice or best practices, but it was actually taking a step back and understanding some of the patterns or beliefs that were really keeping me stuck. What happened is I started leading with more conviction. I made better decisions and I built stronger relationships. And on top of all of that, I felt more confident, both in the role and how I wanted to grow my career beyond it. So if you're a chief of staff that wants to be having more impact, I so get it. And you don't have to keep guessing and straining your way through it. There's a way to approach this role that cuts through what's keeping you stuck and helps you move forward with greater ease and stronger direction. So this is not a rigid system. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but it is a really powerful framework that allows you to understand where the patterns are, cut through some of the complexity, notice patterns, and lead with greater impact. In this video, I'll walk you through a framework that helped me stop spinning my wheels and move forward with more direction and impact. Now, if you're someone that would prefer to skip ahead and jump right to the framework, go ahead and do that. But if you want to understand the mechanics and why this is so complex to navigate, stay with me for a moment. The real friction in this role points back to 4 key relationships, and they are the unlock to everything that you do as a chief of staff. When they are strained, everything that you do feels harder. The first relationship is the relationship with your principal. The second is the relationship with the leadership team. The third is with the broader organization. And the fourth is the relationship with yourself. Let's take a deeper look at each of these 4 relationships. Starting with the relationship with your principal, the person you work most closely with. They set the vision, but the path to get there isn't always clear. So expectations may shift, communication can be imprecise, and you're often translating between ideas and execution and guessing how far you can go without overstepping. So you're expected to act with confidence even when you're unsure how on the same page you really are. And then there's the relationship with the leadership team, where you're bridging across personalities, functions, priorities. You're in the room, but you're not necessarily part of the decision-making power. So your job is to connect the dots, keep things moving, and occasionally smooth tension before it escalates. But without formal ownership, that influence can be really hard to maintain. If the dynamics are broken, you can end up being a fixer and not as much of a strategic partner. And then next is your relationship with the broader organization, where you're the connective tissue between people, systems, and decisions. But often, the team can't even really articulate what exactly you do. You have the pressure of spotting gaps before others do. You catch what's falling through the cracks, and you spend a lot of time keeping things on track behind the scenes. But without clear systems or forms of recognition, that work can quickly become very overwhelming and sustainable and very isolating. And finally, the most important relationship is the one with yourself. You're operating in a high-stakes role, but without a clear roadmap for where it leads. There's no ladder, there's no standard definition of success, and over time, that ambiguity can start to wear you down. So you might begin to question your impact, your growth, or even your direction. You might start asking, Am I really making a difference? Am I building the career I actually want? Do I still know what I want? And without space to reflect or realign, it's really easy to lose sight of your purpose, even if you're working harder than ever. This relationship with yourself determines how you show up to this role mentally and emotionally, influencing every action you take, and therefore how you navigate every other relationship type that we've talked about here. By now, it's probably clear that these are not isolated dynamics. They are deeply connected. When your relationship with the principal is off, it impacts the way the broader team perceives your role or your ability to deliver high-impact work. When your relationship with the leadership team, the broader organization is strained, you can find yourself in firefighting mode, patching problems instead of preventing them. And when you yourself are emotionally overloaded, it can be really hard to lead confidently and decisively. So the more you try to fix things on the surface without really understanding why they're even happening in the first place, the more stuck you're going to feel. Okay, so let's get to the framework. For this framework, I want you to picture a stack of stones, like a trail marker on an expedition, guiding your path forward. Each stone represents a key relationship, and together they show you how to move forward with direction and intentionality. The top stone is your relationship with your principal, your highest stakes partnership. In between are the relationships with your leadership team and the broader organization. And the bottom stone is your relationship with yourself. That's your foundation. Each one of these relationships shapes how you lead, and it defines your potential for growth. So let's walk through each one and talk about how you can invest in each of these relationships a little bit more. We'll start with your relationship with the principal. This is the top stone. The relationship with your principal is your highest stakes relationship, kind of like a work marriage. When it's strong, you move in sync. You anticipate needs, you communicate effectively, and you make aligned decisions. But when it's unclear, you spend energy chasing answers or guessing priorities or reacting to changes instead of creating impact. And the relationship can start to feel misaligned, strained, or just off. So here are 2 practical ways to start strengthening this relationship. First, establish a consistent meeting cadence with your principal and get clear on what exactly you'll cover in those meetings. This feels really obvious to some, but the importance of this touch point cannot be understated. I recommend setting up regular meetings that go beyond task updates and continuously doing a pulse check on ways of working, like decisions, roles, priorities, communication styles. Include a simple emotional check-in, like a 1 to 5 state of mind code, so you can understand where your principal is coming from and anticipate support needs. Think of this as creating space to think deeply, not just operationally. And if something feels off, just name it. Don't let tension linger or go unspoken. Even a quick check-in can prevent misunderstandings from building into bigger problems. Second, revisit expectations often. Maybe this is weekly, monthly, or even quarterly, especially during shifts in priorities or team dynamics or organizational changes. Check in on what success looks like and how authority and accountability are distributed. Don't just assume alignment, but make it explicit and co-owned. Communication is key here, and that includes building a rhythm for giving and receiving feedback. Maybe that's a monthly review or a shared doc, or simply asking, is there anything you could be doing differently to support you better? For example, I noticed in many of the one-on-one meetings with my principal that we were running out of time because so much of that meeting was invested in the task updates that I was providing. It left very little room to actually get to us giving feedback to one another or very clearly and vulnerably communicating how we were feeling, what was going well, what needed work, what needed to be improved. And so what I did with my principal was really get clear on how we wanted to use that time together and take everything else to a separate channel. So all those task updates got moved to email. And instead, it created all this space in the one-on-one to actually focus on any decisions that needed to be made, and any really important updates that my principal needed to be informed about. What happens when you apply this? First, you stop second guessing yourself and your principal's intentions. Second, you anticipate problems before they arise instead of constantly reacting. And third, you lead alongside your principal instead of behind them. So here are some reflection questions that I'll leave you with on this relationship. Ask yourself, where am I unclear about power or trust? This highlights gaps in alignment that can slow decisions or create tension. Second, what conversations feel overdue? This identifies opportunities to remove friction and increase momentum. Now let's move into the second of the 4 relationships. The relationship with the leadership team. It's one of those middle stones where you're the bridge across priorities, power, personalities. If your role isn't clear, you risk becoming a fixer, constantly smoothing over conflicts. Instead, your role can be a key enabler to high-impact work. When this relationship is strong, you act as a connector and a catalyst, helping the leadership team function more effectively and collaboratively. Here are 2 practical ways you could invest in strengthening this relationship. First, get clear about the role you want to play amongst the leadership team and use that vision to design each day around it. Being intentional about your presence in leadership spaces helps build trust. Practical ways to do this include communicating your role in one-on-ones or in team settings, such as recurring check-ins with individuals or structured agendas and leadership meetings, or holding open office hours where leadership members can bring questions or ideas directly to you. This builds trust and allows you to spot misalignments early before they become bigger problems. And this lets you actively guide discussions and surface priorities to ensure the team is aligned without overstepping your role. Second is about naming unspoken tensions with care instead of absorbing them. So notice when there's friction or misalignment and address it thoughtfully. Framing these moments as opportunities to clarify expectations or adjust processes or highlight learning sets a tone of psychological safety. And by surfacing issues and facilitating solutions, you show that you care and that challenges are actionable, not just problems to be silently fixed. So for example, when I started to invest in the one-on-one direct relationships with the leadership team, so much unfolded. I got to understand what was important to certain members of the leadership team, where they felt challenged, where they saw opportunities. Not to mention, I got to know them on a personal level, which made me feel comfortable showing up in broader leadership settings. I was also able to see around corners and identify some blind spots that my principal might not have known and bring that back to my principal when it felt appropriate. So what happens when you invest in this relationship? First, you earn deeper respect, trust, and credibility across the leadership team. Second, you reduce hidden emotional labor and burnout across all parties. And third, you influence and get ahead of business needs earlier rather than reacting after the fact. So here are some reflection questions that I'll leave you with on this relationship. Where are you deferring your executive presence when you could be leading? This highlights missed opportunities to step into leadership and guide the team on behalf of your principal. Second, what unspoken power dynamics are you managing? Like playing mediator, navigating tension between 2 leaders, or carrying invisible authority without recognition. And then we have the relationship with the organization, another one of those middle stones. In your role, this is where culture and process tend to meet. If you're constantly patching problems in this territory, you remain stuck in execution, firefighting instead of shaping the way the organization works. When this relationship is strong, you really act as a connector and a catalyst, creating clarity and efficiency and motivation at scale. Here are 2 practical ways to strengthen this relationship. First, make invisible work visible. List out all the small, repeated, or reactive tasks you're handling, the behind-the-scenes work that no one notices but keeps the organization functioning. Share it with your principal or leadership team. Visibility is the first step towards leveraging your time, clarifying priorities, and establishing authority. Second, create a system for recurring work. Look for patterns and decisions, approvals, or processes that you manage repeatedly across the organization. Build simple tools like shared decision docs, checklists, playbooks, or guidelines, so your value doesn't depend on your constant intervention. By creating these structures, you free yourself and the organization to focus on higher impact work. This can be one of those rare areas where a chief of staff truly owns the work, not just filling gaps, but designing the very systems others rely on end to end. When you build out these systems, your value becomes tangible across the entire organization. For example, whenever there was a big project that I was managing, I typically put together a shared document that had the criteria, the roles and responsibilities, anything that sort of shaped the decision-making, and any updates that needed to be made along the way. And what this allowed me to do was create more transparency with the broader organization. It allowed me to show up with more time and more space because I wasn't running around answering questions or informing people on what was happening. And it also helped people understand my role as a chief of staff, which can be a bit of a challenge for many and something that can keep us very isolated as chiefs of staff. So what happens when you invest in your relationship with the broader organization? First, you move from executor to architect, shaping systems instead of just reacting. Second, your impact multiplies without additional hours. And third, your value becomes visible and scalable, not invisible or assumed. Reflection questions that I'll leave you with on this relationship. What recurring processes are you propping up manually? And how can you turn them into repeatable systems that run without you? This helps identify areas where your intervention can be replaced by sustainable structures. And second, where are you the single point of failure? And what tools or people or processes could help you delegate or scale your work? This reveals how to delegate, automate, or systematize so your influence grows. And lastly, we have the relationship with yourself, the bottom stone. This is the foundation. If it's weak, you overfunction, you question yourself, you drift from your purpose. If it's strong, you lead with clarity, you set boundaries, you stay in touch with what matters. So here are a couple ways you might choose to invest in this relationship. First, notice how your mindset could be holding you back from your full potential. You may find this in the smallest behavioral patterns or in the deep-rooted beliefs about the value you bring to the role. This could look like chasing perfection to avoid risk or overworking to avoid saying no. What do you believe to be true about who you are and how others perceive you? And how might those narratives be limiting your potential? Second, shape your role around your strengths, not just others' expectations. Identify where you create the most impact and where you're stretching too thin. You might test this by taking full ownership of a strategic project that aligns with your strengths while stepping back from work that's draining and less valuable. Pay attention to where you say yes out of guilt or fear and begin creating intentional boundaries that align with your growth. For example, I used to take on every task in sight just to feel valued. But once I slowed down to actually identify where my strengths were being used the best, I could identify where I could release some of those responsibilities or delegate some of those responsibilities and instead go deeper into where I was really strong and where I could deliver more high impact work. What that did for me is it freed up time to invest in the things that were actually giving me a ton of energy and fueling the way that I wanted to grow my career. I also applied the 80-20 rule, focusing my energy on 20% of the work that produced 80% of the results. Instead of losing trust, I gained it. And I had more space to lead strategically rather than just reacting. And my contributions became far more visible and valued. So here's what happens when you start working on that relationship with yourself. You stop seeking permission to lead. You make faster and more confident decisions without second guessing. And you feel less reactive and more anchored in your purpose. So here are some reflections that I'll leave you with on this relationship. Where are you staying safe, and how is that limiting your potential? This uncovers places where you're maybe staying a little small and how it's holding you back from deeper impact or growth. Second, which responsibilities do you find most energizing? This grounds you in your own internal compass, not external noise. And third, how do you want to grow and on whose terms? This keeps your trajectory aligned with your actual values. So yeah, that was a lot. No wonder this role feels really hard. So if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling like this role is incredibly challenging, take a look at this framework. It's a structure. It's an anchor for you to take a deeper look at each of these relationships that will unlock so much clarity and so much impact for you in your role. If this resonates, come find me on Instagram and message me the word path. More information in the description of this video.